Welcome to Rock That Relationship, a podcast about all things relationship with Corey and Tracy.
Now let's get real and start creating relationships that rock.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rock That Relationship. We're here today in our series all about thriving in relationships. And we have just an amazing guest on today. I'm literally cannot wait to talk to her. This has been so, anticipatory. I've been counting it down. Truly, truly. We have on Xandra Hawes, who's a therapist and spiritual coach. And we're going to talk all about spirituality, intuition, kind of connecting, with yourself and with kind of your, the universe, all these kinds of cool things. Well, at least that's what we're going to ask Xandra about, and get some insight. So, thank you so much, Xandra, for being here today.
I'm so excited to jump in with you all as well. It's going to be great.
Awesome. Well, maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do. What does it really mean to you to be a therapist and a spiritual coach?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I never knew when I was going into therapy that it was going to become such a fad. I had no idea that people famous were going to be singing about how important therapy was. And so I didn't really understand when I was going in how important it was to be aligned in your own authenticity. And so what that meant for me is that I was like, what level and type of therapy do I want to be in? And what does that look like? And my background is in Buddhist psychology. So there's so much of a little bit of a different take on therapy. And so I come at therapy really combining a lot of different wisdom traditions, you could call it, a lot of Buddhist psychology based, which is really seeing people as whole beings, essentially. A lot of therapy in terms of the history of it is really hierarchical around I am the clinician that knows everything and you are the patient, that doesn't know yourself. And we're going to kind of guide you from this lacking space. And Buddhist psychology is very much so witnessing the wisdom in people. And even if they've made quote unquote mistakes or things in the past, how was that a wisdom kind of helping them evolve? It's all about honoring that person's evolution and really seeing them from a very high level. For me, it means seeing someone as a soul in a way. And so as a therapist, I witness people from that wisdom place and work with them from that place to plug back in kind of to their higher self. And so the therapist role has a lot more mental health pieces where someone's coming in and perhaps has a diagnosis or maybe is on medication or things like that, versus the spiritual coaching is folks that are pretty resourced in terms of mental health, but maybe they're going through somewhat of a spiritual crisis or emergence. Maybe something happened in their life and all of a sudden certain abilities or concepts are kind of coming through. Maybe a breakup happened and all of a sudden someone's having these big revelations and they're I'm sad and I'm healing and I feel like I'm okay mental health wise, but all of a sudden I just feel like I have to go in this direction. I'm just being pushed this way. I'm feeling myself. So, the spiritual coaching a lot of times has energy medicine or energy healing components in it versus the therapy is a little bit more resourced on the mental health realm, if that makes sense. You can kind of think of it in two little hats that are different. They have overlaps, but they're a little bit different in certain ways.
It makes sense to me. I'm actually a Buddhist and I have the tattoos to prove it here, but they're forbidden in Thailand, so I have to cover them up when I go there. But my therapist is actually similar to you. I don't think she's a straight up Buddhist, but she's very spiritual. And so then it helps me because I can actually address both things. I had therapy this morning and talked about that stuff because there's you're operating in two different realms, right? The practical, here we are, but having that whole spiritual outlook has made me completely much calmer, happier, much more content, as a person.
I'm so happy that you found that then to someone to interweave with you there, because then you can talk about practice, right? And even some of the deeper concepts, right? Or when things are happening, some people really that are Buddhists lean into understanding Bardo, right? And understanding some of these ways of working with the mind, and working with the emotions. And so when you have someone that can check in on that practice and that deepening work, you kind of get to feel home in a different way in therapy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I only go to her now like once a month maybe, or when I really want to discuss things. And it's very helpful. So I just want to say thanks. I think that's really helpful for a lot of people, and more people should understand that, you know? And the whole thing about being spiritual, I think also in a relationship or as you age is I think for me, it's given me just much more peace of mind. I've had a lot of losses lately, beloved, animals and stuff, and terrible catastrophic things happening where I was in Thailand. And the only way for me to really have an understanding of that is in a bigger spiritual picture.
Yeah. 100%.
But then I have to deal with, okay, how do I get through the day to day, right? Because I'm still here. So it's like, oh, I can think of myself in this greater spiritual realm, but then I'm still on this earth having to just deal with the practical of having to have a job and, do all that or be in relationship or not be in relationship. And so it is super, super helpful. I wish there was that marriage in a lot more people like you and my therapist.
Ooh, I feel like those are hitting on such important questions too, of like, how do I have that deeper understanding and awareness of myself, and how do I pay for things, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I fix my car? How do I, be able to do both? So you're right, that intersection, I think it's coming. It feels like it's coming in terms of like people are pushing for those things. So I hope our world continues to evolve, right? And some of these systems that block those connections start opening, whether it's insurances, right? Or whether it's
Mm-hmm.
these programs that start subsidizing these intersections that are so important for people. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as more providers understand or can be working in dual realms, I think that's
Mm-hmm.
helpful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, and
100%.
I think too the connection between, for me, for the spiritual and mental, like almost can't be teased apart. And I, sometimes I'm having a spiritual crisis, but as you were talking about, Xandra, it's like, but I feel like I've worked through like some of my like mental health childhood issues, and I'm really kind of looking at something almost bigger, and I want to process that with someone who can, kind of blend them. And as we talk about that, like I'm wondering, and I know Tracy brought this up with her therapist, but how does that work? How do you like approach like doing any kind of therapeutic work where you're bringing in the spiritual, the intuitive, the, whatever that might look like, along with the mental health? And how do you make it so that, does it feel connected, or how are you able to connect that with people?
It's a good question. And actually, it's so funny. Like originally when I had 2 different websites. Originally, I had like 4 different emails because I was like, I have to split these because legality wise, there was so much of like, how do you do this ethically? Because I was doing psychic reading work on one hand and doing mental health work on another hand. And so I realized I would have people I tried to separate them so people didn't always know I was doing psychic reading work, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Because I'd have clients coming in and be talking about, something and be like, could you just do a psychic reading and give me the answer? And I started being like, oh, mental health work is really about honoring that person's deep spiritual knowing and helping them click into the answer, versus psychic reading work is so much about receiving kind of a healing. We are clicking them back into their higher self. It's just I'm basically leaning in, getting information from that person's higher self that they can't come into contact with because of grief, because of maybe some emotions that are heavier. Maybe a lot of doubt comes up for people, especially on their spiritual journey. There's a lot of like, am I crazy? Am I making it up too? That starts to happen when people are kind of going into their intuition. And so to have someone create a loving space that's like, hey, this is what I'm getting and seeing and witnessing from your higher self. A lot of times people kind of click back in and are like, oh, I can trust myself. And so it was a tricky line between how do I provide that energetic kind of space for someone to come into contact with themselves. And so it's why now I don't do as many psychic readings. I've been doing it for a while where now I teach people how to fish for themselves. So a lot of the spiritual coaching work is like folks coming in and saying, I really want to trust my own information at a deeper level. And so I have lots of different tools that I teach people and like protocols and stuff, or I'll do readings with them where I'll say like, hey, let's do a reading. Someone will come in on a relationship and say like in a coaching context and be like, I'm really frustrated. I can't tell if my friend is mad at me, and I can't tell if I'm taking it personally. And there's a lot of gunk in there. And I'll be like, well, let's do a psychic reading on them together. And I'll guide that person through how to read certain things. And I'll say, I'll kind of like show them how to do things. And people are like, wow, I'm like, you just did your first psychic reading on different energies, right? That's probably not helpful for someone in a mental health state, right? That is maybe super spiritual, but maybe they're going through so much anxiety that they're having a hard time, managing their day or going to the grocery store, right? Or being able to do self-care things for themselves, like meditate. We're not going to go that deep in those things until they're a lot more in their root system. So that I kind of think of it like a tree. You got to really get in the roots and in the trunk of the tree before you can go into sort of these spiritual avenues. Because if you go too hard up into the spiritual work, it's almost like a tree that doesn't have secure enough roots in the ground. You end up tipping over. Or when you get spiritual information or intuition, you don't trust it because as you're bringing it into the body, fear, doubt, uncertainty, old family stuff about being able to trust yourself. All of that stuff can kind of come up. So sometimes I work with people on a mental health sort of level. And then we sort of shift into the coaching realm when they're sort of ready, but I still have different paperwork, different documents. Boulder, Colorado is a very hodgepodge of these energies, but legality wise, you have to be really careful about, staying within the scope of what a therapist can do. And then, the coaching realm really has to be differentiated there too. So that's kind of, I don't want to get too technical and too boring around that end, but there is a lot of ways to interweave them together. And I will get psychic hits all the time when I'm sitting with people in both realms. I'll say things to people and be like, oh, and I'll use different, gosh, what was it the other day? I started like, someone was talking and I just got this picture. Oh gosh, what was it? I got some sort of model or picture and I was like, yeah, it sounds like XX and X. And they just started laughing and they're like, oh my God, that's exactly what happened yesterday or the day before. They said, so I know my higher self is like talking with you through that. So people's higher selves are kind of talking with us all the time, and so we get those intuitive hits and then we sort of give them back to folks, even though I'm not doing a psychic reading, it's their higher self kind of giving me information and then I'm kind of like intuiting it back to them, but it's not always conscious for me either in the mental health context until they tell me like, wow, that's like the third sign someone's given me of that week of this particular color or metaphor or resource or, some sort of synchronicity, I guess you'll say.
It's interesting. Earlier you said that when you started talking about this is like people say, oh, am I crazy or is this crazy? And I've had so many people because I had the astrologer and we've had her on the podcast twice who I worked with for a long time. And my friend's like, you're just throwing money away. And I'm like, I'm not she's not telling me to sign over my house to her, right? Like it's actually helping me and it's helping me in a different way than therapy does. And what I find so interesting is that when you watch a lot of sports or stuff like that, it's like practically every athlete is thanking God and God for their success and this and that. And it like strikes me when I watch sports because there seems to be like this so much reliance on God help them get to this NBA finals or WNBA finals. And nobody ever says, well, are you insane? Like as if God cares about your WNBA finals, right? But I think it's so, like, especially in our country, particularly, like it's okay to have a reliance on God, but it's not okay to have a reliance on other things or that you should look within yourself. Right. And so, I mean, for me, I don't come from a religious background. So therefore I only look to my own self, and they're never questioned as if that's crazy.
It's true.
Right? Like they can say that on national TV, God helped them win this championship. And the more sports you watch, it's the more you see it. And it's very interesting to me because, maybe it is God. I don't know, but maybe it's a reliance. It's like this belief in themselves. And I think when you talk about the spiritual stuff, it's really like, and trusting yourself and looking, it's belief in yourself. Which is what I'm gaining the more that I'm by myself and focusing on myself and my life.
I think you're striking something important and maybe there's a shift happening in the culture too around like DBT dialectical behavior therapy in psychology uses the word wise self, basically, as a way to like, how do we connect in with our wise self, right? And people will say best self. And now people are starting to say higher self, right? So there's these shifts in like, how do I connect with this higher state of being that's within me and an opportunity, rather than just always saying, I'm going to pray to God, and I guess for me, like, I sort of think of like, if we take the religious context, I think you can also feel into like your higher self might be an aspect that's also connected to source or the divine or the universe or consciousness or whatever aspect. So just by connecting in with yourself at a higher level, you're connecting into divinity, if you will, at a higher level, if you believe that kind of field kind of exists.
Like interconnectedness of everybody. So you're then tapping into that collective.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So we'll see. You're right. But is on the sports front, what I will say is I was watching, last year, I can't remember what game this was, in the NBA, but they were interviewing the coach and they were like, how do you think if some player that had like a fantastic game, and they were interviewing the coach and they were like, how do you think he did that? And the coach said, I don't know. There's just a magical aura about him. And I almost fell off my chair. And I was like, okay, like maybe we're starting to shift.
Right.
No one said anything about like, it was sort of just like honoring this person's energy field and how they were activating it and how they were, embodying it in some way. So I'm curious to see how the sports might shift, or how the like embodiment of our best selves and how we bring that self into relationships. Right. I'm curious to see the trends that are going to start happening in that.
I love that. And I love that this conversation, because, being able to have more and more discussion about the way that all of these things we're talking about have to do with, positively influencing our relationships. Because I know that there are people out there, particularly our listeners, that are sometimes just looking for, what are some other avenues I can go down to learn about myself, heal myself, work with my partner, thrive with my partner, and really thinking about some more of these kind of, spiritual, intuitive, this kind of better, best self kinds of ideas that we're talking about can really, it's just another avenue for them. And so like, if you were to translate some of this into relationships, how can people together, or even individually as two individual people in a relationship, kind of tap into their higher selves to thrive in their relationship?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's interesting. It was probably the biggest ache point that I experienced around relationships, especially, there's these different spiritual conventions essentially that happen in Colorado a few times a year. And I would go to these conventions and I would do 50 or 60 psychic readings in one weekend, just back to back to back to back. And yeah, it was a lot of energy. And I will say at least 75% of them were people coming up and asking me to psychically look at whether or not that they could stay with their partner, or whether thing was going to change. It was and a lot of it, I will tell you, at the spiritual convention were mostly, I would say, women and non-binary people that were between 40 and 70, I would say. So there was this huge trend of folks that were like, I really want to grow. I really want to evolve. I really want to heal. I want to bring in spirituality into my relationship. And I can feel as I'm doing that, my frequency, or how I exist in the world, my energetic makeup is starting to shift. And my partner and I either haven't been in alignment for a long time, or we're starting to almost be on like two different channels. And so I'm wondering, like, is it possible for us to do that? Do I have to leave this person? And sometimes there were kiddos in there. There was all these questions about, how do I prioritize my own self-growth? How do I thrive in my relationship? And most importantly, do you think it's possible? And so it was hard, right? Because I don't want to be the chooser of whether or not someone stays with their partner. So my role in sitting with them from that psychic sort of perspective, we put that hat on, was sort of looking at people's spaces and reading their energy and saying, this is what I see you trying to activate. Is that accurate? And most of the time people were like, yeah. And I'd say, okay, How authentic have you been with your partner about where you want to go and where you want to be? And a lot of people would say, well, I've been like telling my partner that I'm like annoyed or frustrated with these things in them or trying to point certain things out. And I was like, I'm aware you're probably annoyed at a lot of things that they're doing, but have you sat down and kind of opened your heart and been like, I'm really inspired to go here. I'm really inspired to do this. And I really want to know, does that inspire you too? Because I want to journey on this together and I want to challenge certain things together. And I want to know like, what inspires you? What lights you up? You know, if we could paint a picture where you would love to be in 5 or 10 years, what does it look like? Can we get really honest about where we want to be and where we want to go and what are our overlaps? What is allowing each of us to do our own thing and to have our own growth? But there obviously has to be a certain amount of overlap to feel like we're interweaving together and we can support each other's work. And so very few people either A, felt they had the skills to be able to do that, or they hadn't intuitively asked because they were so scared that their picture was going to be different than their partner. So they were more in like resentment, anger, grief, more of those spaces around like, I can feel that my partner's doing things that I don't like. And so it would be more of these unconscious comments that would get made. Or it would be more like avoidance. Certain attachment styles would get flared up and people would just avoid, or they would become kind of like overly anxious. But most folks would kind of blame their partner in a way for like, I'm not evolving because this person's not. Mm-hmm. And so what I had to help people do was to kind of come home into like, if we put that person like outside for a second, like, can you get really clear what you want? And are you scared to ask for what you want? So a lot of times it was, how do I help you click back into your higher self, into your own self-trust, into your own inspiration? And then you can come to this person with authenticity rather than coming to this person and saying, being in more of a blame space. So that was my experience a lot of the time, was people getting really clear on an intuitive level of like, what do I want to let go of? What do I want to call in? Again, that big, like, if I could paint a picture in 5 years, 10 years, and 15 years, what do I want to embody and what do I want to let go of? And if you can't have that conversation with your partner, then I would be questioning why. I would be questioning like, what emotion or what projection is in the way. And some people would be like, my partner won't have that conversation with me. And I would be like, okay, how do we clear your side of the street then? You know, I think it's important for you to show up in your authenticity. And I would tell people, they'd be like, well, you know, I feel like I need to give myself permission. And I'd be like, well, here's the thing. If you keep aligning closer to yourself, your partner will either match that frequency or they will fall away. You don't actually have to do anything but continue to align in yourself, be authentic, share what you know. And again, they will match you and interweave, or they will fall away and it'll feel like more and more and more you're on 2 different channels and you'll have your answer. But if you stray away from who you really are and who you're becoming, you're just going to go unconscious, go into resentment, or go into freeze. And so that's the first step. I see a lot of healers and people pleasers that will try to like pull their significant other along and get really resentful about that person not evolving in the way that we would like, but they rarely ask their partner, what are you inspired by? Or can you take some time to think about this so that we can look at a bigger spiritual evolution map if that's available to you, essentially.
Wow. I've been wondering that. There. Yeah, I have been wondering that question for a really long time because, you know, it's, I've talked to even Tracy about this in terms of even friendships. It's like, it's kind of the more spiritually evolved I feel like I'm becoming, like just becoming more whole, bigger, like there's just more complexity and just more stuff, and more excited that I am to kind of go through all of that and keep discovering and learning. The more I'm realizing the people around me that aren't in that space, not only they're not just not in it, but they have no interest in going into it. And so I'm even finding the disconnect happening like among friends. And that's hard because it's like, oh, do I want to like move away from that friendship? Is that significant enough for me to do that? Even though we like to go hiking together or something? Or is it something I can live with, or is it something that's really like a deal breaker? And I feel like the more I'm getting invested into my own spiritual involvement, the more it is becoming important for me as a context for friendship, not let alone a relationship. But I don't know, have you heard of, the people talking about that with other areas of their lives too? Like they're just feeling sort of like just kind of disconnected because of that?
100%. 100%. And I feel it when you're talking about it, because most people that are aligning more and more with who they are, there's this sense of kind of dropping density, like letting go of things. And you're sort of like, your priorities are changing, your values are changing, where you want to spend your time is changing. I would say, I use this in a loving sort of way, but there are all different missions, I believe, why we choose, this is from a Buddhist perspective, like why we choose our current incarnation. And I have found that it's okay that some people are just here to experience the energy. They are just here to have an experience, learn, grow, but they're here to experience the energy. They're here to just kind of flow with what's happening. They're here to kind of just go more with the status quo. Maybe they have some strong opinions, but they're kind of locked in what I would call into more of the 3D reality of things. And that's okay. That's okay. Some people just want to be here to experience, to discover opinions. And then there are other folks that want to break out into a higher sort of, that's what they call like spiritual awakening or ascension. They want to actually be as close to they can to their basic goodness. They want to like essentially walk that higher self. They want to live it because they realize like, oh my gosh, it doesn't feel good when I don't. So sometimes it comes out of pain. Sometimes it comes out of like this like really achy longing. Most of my folks that are evolving spiritually have this like longing to come home to themselves. There's this like unquenchable like mission feeling. There's like a mission, there's a purpose, there's a longing. They want to connect to a soul family. There's a sense of like, we can do this. They're here to sort of change the energy because they believe it's possible. And from a multi-life perspective, sometimes those are my folks that have actually had lives where they've seen things like that happen, or it's possible. They come in with a mission to shift things, right? So you might have grown up in a family system or had great friends. Again, there's no judgment about why people are here on planet Earth and why they've chosen, again, Buddhist from this particular incarnation. But if you're around folks that are just here to experience the energy, they're not really going to get curious about what you're doing. You might share a really cool experience and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's nice. Have you seen, this new restaurant just went up down the street? And you're like,
yes,
you're like, yeah, cool. And you can feel this like deflated feeling where you want someone to be like, how is that for you? Or like, wow, yeah, I've been doing this. You want that kind of like soul family feeling like, hey, we're all kind of on the team doing this. And they're going to be folks around you that's not actually part of their greater mission. And so some of it is acceptance. And some of it is love. And if we can accept and love that people around us maybe aren't on the same mission, we don't have to let them go out of malice or out of like, you're not enough or we're not working. But there's just a sense of like, for your greater mission, if you want to be more inspired, those probably are the folks that you're not going to spend as much of your time with because they're not working on the same thing. And so you're not going to get as much energy, like response in your space. It's not going to light up in the same way. And people feel really guilty about that, or they feel really judgmental about that. I hear that about families all the time, especially around the holidays. There's this sense of like, do I finally put the boundary down and say, I'm not coming over? Or like, I call it the family Olympics for most of us, but, I think it's really important sometimes to lean into the energy of like, if you have a mission, if you have a longing to come home, it gets activated easier when you're around soul family or beings that are around the same mission, or maybe have had similar life experiences, or want to come home to who they really are, essentially. So they're holding a similar vibration in their field.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I love that. I love that.
Okay, so how important is it then for people who are spiritually like on their own path or on a path that may be different for others? Like how important are like dating relationships and even friendships, that's kind of where I am now, even though this season's about thriving in relationships. I have zero interest in being in one. And that's the first time in 30 years that I've felt that way. And I just don't want anyone getting in my way anymore. And I'm starting to feel the same way about friends too. It's not worth my time. Like, I've got things I want to accomplish. I don't know if it's because I'm over 50 now and suddenly I feel an urgency, even though I intend to live to 106. Like, I want to get all the things done that I wanted to get done, and I no longer care. Like, I travel by myself. I'm going to go to Kilimanjaro in May. I don't care. I do not care if anyone I know is around. Like, I want to do what I need to do. And I have lost my beloved pets recently, and my feeling is everyone's on their own path and they've moved on to their next whatever incarnation. And I kind of am feeling that way, even though I'm here physically. I don't care anymore. Like, something has shifted in me that I really don't care. Don't care. Like, I'm just going to do what I need to do for myself and set myself up for whatever's next, and to enjoy the time that I have left here. And I do feel like a lot of times when not in sync with others, it just really now seems to drag me down in a way it didn't 20 years ago. Like, I feel, time is wasted.
Well, are you saying all the steps that you're taking, does it feel a lot more nourishing to pursue that path?
Yes. Like, I feel so much better. So much better as a person. I'm so much happier. I'm like, always people have thought I was a happy person, but I'm like 10 times happier than I ever was before.
Ooh, it sounds like you're discovering your own magic then, because a lot of folks, like, I see a lot of people that are like trying to be in partnership or trying to be in relationships, and like some codependence is, right, a really strong word in the relationship community. And I think there's lots of different definitions of it, but if we take your situation, right, whatever it might be, it sounds like there's a neutrality that's starting to develop around, like, and there's also a coming home of like, I actually really enjoy being with me. I actually really enjoy feeling nourished by my own internal world and my external world. And I feel powerful and aligned. And so usually when we're clicked into our own trust, we find that our requirements for other people to be certain ways or to act certain ways starts to fade out. And so I imagine from that energy of, I'm just going to stay aligned in myself and I'm going to release expectations of needing certain people to show up or be certain ways, usually you end up drawing in, which is so funny. You end up individuating a lot, but on the back end, I usually, what I see people eventually is they start actually drawing in more meaningful relationships where people are matching that same frequency, because all the muck and all of the kind of codependent dynamics of needing people to be certain ways fade out, and you start actually creating community from the same kind of vantage point that you're coming from. So I picture a building. It sounds like for the last like maybe 20 years, it's been a lot of like hanging out on the first, second, third floor. And now there's this sense of going up onto the fourth or fifth or even sixth. And so your viewpoint and panoramic perspective has changed around like, I can see a lot more. I can see myself a lot more. And I'm realizing from up here that I don't need to get lost in the little details. I don't need to like get into these little things with people. I just actually trust me and I let go. And it sounds like it's working.
It does seem to really be working. And it's more of like, I was always afraid, oh my gosh, I don't want to become introverted or anything like that. Like, I'm still super extroverted, but when I get that feeling from people that we're not vibing or, the energy is not right, I'm just done. I don't waste my time anymore, relationship dating or even hanging around people anymore. It's very weird. It's a total weird shift. And I don't feel like, oh, I'm becoming some kind of recluse or something. It's just that I'm going to spend my time with the people that make me actually feel better.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
And I feel that way about relationships too. And you probably don't know this. I'm a family law attorney now. And, I just like over and over these people in these awful, just really sad relationships. And it really is dragging them down. And now my advice to people or the understanding is, look, the next 2 years are going to suck while you're getting this divorce and while you're doing this. but then you can take this time to change your life, to get what you want out of your life. Really, look at what you just went through and then to make a better choice going forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I
So
love that
I
you can
think,
be that perspective too for people. I think
well,
that's
and that
huge.
divorce doesn't have to necessarily be this awful, awful thing, right? That it can be a new beginning for the person if you can learn to let go of that negativity. And that's what I feel like in my own personal life, that negativity is just going away. Like I am not, it's like I put up a force field. So I could still be super extroverted and whatnot, but nobody can, like, I am not letting that in anymore.
I mean, all I hear with that is like you're maintaining your frequency. And when you maintain your frequency, you don't match other people's energy, what they're going through. That's sort of like the empath kind of stuff most people struggle with. Most people on spiritual paths have sensitivity and empathy. And when you hold a line in your own frequency, you don't switch into people's drama, right? You don't switch into people's kind of like emotional pieces. You're steady in it. And so congratulations. I hope that's inspiring for other people to be like, okay, I just have to get to 50 and then it'll be
54.
Like that.
No, I didn't even change until I got to 54. And I don't know what has happened, but it is interesting. Like Corey and I have a very different perspective on this. I can hear and take in, I'm exposed to a lot of negativity, a lot of really traumatic, horrible things, like every day, all day long. And just the same with my pets dying, like it doesn't affect me. Like I have decided that I'm going to be happy now going forward. Something shifted where I'm going to be happy. Whether someone wants to date me or not, it's not going to affect me. Whether my pets pass on, not going to affect me. Whether I talk to 10 clients a day who are in distress, not going to affect me. And I really would like going forward to show people, or for people to understand, like the peace and the happiness. I never wanted peace in my life before. I was all about chaos. I was in all kinds of like just crazy relationships and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. Like the crazier, the better. And now I want nothing to do with that. And I just want to keep like, it's not that my life is getting boring. And that's what I had worried about when I was younger. If I let go of this chaos, if I stop getting into these chaotic relationships, I'm going to be so boring. But I've come to a whole different level of peace and understanding that, we really have to evolve on our own. We can't be, if you're waiting for somebody to evolve with you, you're creating your own suffering at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I do see that in relationships, and I don't think you can really thrive until you determine that. And like, there's the people that are codependent, mushed together, the people who are hyper independent, and then the people who are totally separate. So if they break apart, they're not going to disappear or crumble or, not know what their life is about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and you said Corey has a different perspective. Do you want to share, Corey, is your perspective different or similar in those pieces?
Well, I think what's interesting is our vantage point's different because I'm in a long-term relationship. And, and Tracy has come in and out of some relationships since I've known her. And so I can see that chaos and I have, a different situation where I'm trying to balance my independent spiritual evolution with being in partnership. And that person's on their own journey of whatever she wants to do. But I've tried to figure out for my own self about what does my evolution look like? I mean, because Tracy can do it now alone, which in some ways is a little bit, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit easier. At least it's different circumstances.
But also the exposure to other people's trauma. That's where, we super
yeah,
differ.
that is different. But I'm just thinking in general, trying to go through an independent experience while in relationship is also really tricky to balance because there is someone else to consider. So, whether that's time spent or whether that's just discussions to be had or whatever. And so that's definitely different. But I mean, as far as the trauma piece goes, I've always been really good about, I'm a big empath and I've had a really hard time creating boundaries around people's trauma, and trying to be a compassionate person without sort of absorbing their angst and pain. And that's, so it's all this kind of stuff of like, how do I create my own evolution while I'm in partnership? And I think as we talk about like thriving relationships, and you were talking about how you can't sort of, everybody's on their own path, but we think about it when you're in partnership. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? What are some like things that people in like a situation like me, where they're in a relationship, they want that relationship to thrive, but they want that kind of spiritual evolution that's going to happen independently, but knowing that they're in partnership. So other than just discernment of whether or not to be with them, are there strategies or ideas about what to do to how to, continue on with that evolution while knowing that you're also sort of a little bit, not entirely because we're all our independent selves, but a little bit in tandem with another person?
I think it's a really important question because I see that a lot. It's rare that I see two people in relationship saying like, we feel like we're evolving spiritually at the same rate in evolution. Because as folks are with each other longer, sometimes I see folks that aren't necessarily on a spiritual evolutionary path have something really big happen, and all of a sudden it sort of puts them on that path. I see it's tricky, right? When you're sort of evolving, and sometimes we want our partners to like match that or be integrated in that. And that's why like the first thing I mentioned about really getting a true sense of like, where do they want to be and what does that look like? So you can really have that awareness of like, what is their picture about where they want to be. But I think there's something also important about feeling really supported. I think that's another issue that I see is sometimes if one person is spiritually evolving, or like whether that's like taking classes, or maybe they get a tarot deck, or they're meditating, or they start going, I mean, there's so many different traditions. They study herbalism, or they start going to drum ceremonies, or like they start doing these or participating in spiritual based things. And maybe that other partner is like, not really doing those things. I see people really being able to thrive if that other partner that's not doing the things can hold a really deep sense of like curiosity, excitement, can ask really good questions, can provide a lot of empathy, because sometimes we don't need someone in our partnership to be doing the exact same thing. But when we're sitting across the dinner table being like, oh, I just did this breath work thing, right? Or I just did this, or I'm going to go get an energy healing. When your partner goes, that's great, babe. And that's the end of the conversation, or like, I'm happy for you. That's where you go, oh, I feel alone in this. And we don't actually have to feel alone in it if our partner's wanting to learn more about it. And so sometimes what I find is partnerships of, if partner A is doing the evolution at like maybe a more intense speed and partner B is not, what partner A has to be able to do for partner B is say, this really matters to me. And I love when you ask me questions. It makes me feel held. It makes me feel like we don't need to be doing the same thing, but you're totally there, or you're interested, or you're proud of me, or you're excited. That's a lot of times what partner A really needs. And sometimes partner B is not aware of that, or doesn't have the like advanced empathy skills to be able to like hold space for those things. And so that's one thing that I find is even if partner B has a different mission, I think those things can thrive. But partner A being able to ask partner B, and partner B not getting upset about, they'll be like, oh, of course I support you. A lot of people will be like, what do you mean I'm supporting you? What do you mean I'm not being supportive? Or like, what do you mean I'm listening? And for that, there's really awesome YouTube videos about advanced empathetic listening skills. I usually send my couples. I'm like, hey, you should watch this 10-minute video about advanced empathy skills. So that way, even if a lot of people don't know what to say, like partner B is just like, I don't know, like you could spend 5 minutes talking about your spiritual experience, and then partner B will be like, you'll be like, I just want to be supported. And they're like, I do support you. That sounds good. Like I listened. And then you're like, but you didn't ask me any questions, right? Or you didn't like seem really curious, or you didn't. And so sometimes it's a lack of partner B's deeper curiosity, empathy skills that are kind of making the issue of the spiritual evolution feel more alone. It doesn't have to feel more alone. And so again, when I see that happening in relationships, sometimes I will usually I'm seeing partner A. I usually don't have partner B's. I'm very niched in terms of my therapy. It's all star seeds and light workers and helpers and spiritual beings. So usually I'm the one, we're trying to get partner B on board without targeting them as not being enough. Essentially, a lot of the time we're like, okay, this doesn't mean that you're not enough. This doesn't mean that you're not providing awesome things for partner A, but these need to be some deeper skills that like need to be worked on together in order for partner A to continue going out into these spaces and exploring, but also feeling tethered and safe with you and like supported and like you're really proud of them. A lot of times spiritual work is really hard. So if you have a partner that's like, babe, I'm so proud of you. Like, what was that like today? Or like, I really want to know. I don't want to do it, but like, I want to understand your world. That's sometimes all we need. And most people don't know how to give that. And I don't know if like you're in that situation or you see other people, but we need that sense of that person holding us down, right? If you're the kite, having someone hold the string and being like, what's it like up there? We don't always need the kite next to us the whole time. Then no one's rooted.
Oh,
no one's grounded in it.
I love that metaphor.
I want to talk about this one issue, but I think we'll have to table it for another podcast because the whole thing about being an empath, that I want to have whole discussions around that because that's just really interesting to me. But I'm going to move on to past lives. So like you mentioned past lives earlier, how do past lives figure in, and does that figure into your work with people, or can that affect people's current relationships?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the amount of karma that I see people working through in their soul family relationships, through their partnerships. Sometimes I will see people in relationships for years that are like, we're not right in this life, but like I felt like in previous lives. So there's a lot of karmic, healing that people are doing. And again, sometimes I see people in relationships kind of pick back up and re-date someone or have partnerships with someone. And they have a really hard time letting go because they know that person so well, but the frequency and what they're working on in this life quite don't match. Sometimes I see people stay in relationships for years around that kind of stuff. And so, from the spiritual coaching standpoint, when people come in and they're like, I've been with this person for years. We're very aware that we have a lot of past lives. I really want to be able to let this person go, but I feel so close to them. It feels like my soul is sort of like part of them in a way. We have to really come into the concept then that person might be part of your soul family. I'm like, wow. So you've chosen this person from the multi-life perspective to play a lot of different roles in your life. Maybe they've been a different partner. Maybe they've been a family member, who knows, in different lives. And it sounds like being together in this life is causing pain. It sounds like it's not allowing you to stay at the frequency that you would like to be in. And so a lot of times we have to do what I call is energetic contract clearing, which there's different steps to that. The first step is usually pain or grief of like, I wish it was different, right? So our ego is like, I really want this to be different. The second step with that is finding a sense of like, I'm grieving what I thought was possible. The second is, how do I come into my own knowing? And third, when people get far enough away, is gratitude. It is like deep, when you can get to a point of like, I'm so grateful that this person helped me evolve in this way. It doesn't mean that it wasn't painful. It doesn't mean that it wasn't hard. It doesn't mean that maybe we didn't get some scars along the way. But when you can really have gratitude, you can also forgive. And forgiveness is not about the other person, right? It's for us. Right. And so, yeah, I see a lot of it. I see even oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, you can go ahead first and then I'll say what I was going to say.
I mean, even like my mom and I joke, this is the first time like she rocked being the parent and we just laugh hysterically about it. I'm like, remember how you decided in this life to be the parent and like it was a little rocky at first? And I was like, she's like, yeah, you've definitely been mom more times than I have. And I was like, you did pretty good though. So I'm in a place to be able to have that sort of with her where we can joke about it. Cause sometimes like our souls are like, yeah, let me try this out. And you're like, oh, you were terrible at that. Why were you my sibling? We should not have done that dynamic. So some of my folks, we can have humor about those things. But those sometimes are the most meaningful, but messy when we know people through this life and others. It makes it tricky to know when to stay, when to go, when to stay connected, when to release someone. It's really tricky and complex sometimes.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like I feel that I've had these past life experiences with people that I've then dated in this lifetime, right? And it's been like off the charts crazy. And then it caused a lot of emotional pain until I understood it. And then that's what released me and let me be able to move on and then to be grateful for that. So I feel like there's so much work to be done. If people could just look at that instead of being bitter and resentful, oh, this person messed up my life, this happened, that. If you say, okay, like obviously we had a really strong connection. There must have been a reason that brought us together. Now let's look at like, what did I learn out of that? And one of my worst relationships and most messy and that nobody around me liked was actually probably the one that helped me the most in this lifetime. But only after like an Akashic reader and then my astrologer explained to me what was happening. And then I could put all of that into perspective in a totally different way. And I guess that's what I'm saying, like about the shift that I've had is that I see the parts that people are, the roles that people are playing in all of our different lives, and to not get so worked up about, okay, what is being done right now? Because, a lot of people have this perception of karma as like, oh, you're going to get it. You're getting what's coming to you. And like Bethany, the astrologer we've had on before, said it's not about punishment. Karma is meant for you to be able to learn, right? So to expand yourself and to grow. And I look at that now and I think, okay, well, all the suffering that is occurring on this earth right now is informing that suffering person, hey, maybe I don't want to cause this in the next lifetime to somebody else. So rather than it being punitive, it could be educational. And I think all relationships end up being that way if you can take the perspective you're talking about. But it seems to be like a foreign concept or freaks people out when you talk about it that way.
100%. And it might be the single life perspective and also the like soulmate kind of theme most of us are fed of, like, if you have a really deep connection with someone, they must be your soulmate, and they might just be part of a deeper family of souls that you incarnate and have different experience from. So I think that combination of, you have to find that one person, and if it's really, really deep, you really have to stay connected to them, even if there is pain. So you're right. If we could say, like, there's a lot of amazing people from different lives I'm going to meet. There's going to be really beautiful experiences. And if I can just continue to ask myself, what am I learning? Can I be grateful for the learning? Can I be grateful for the evolution? And can I let it go when I've learned all I need to? I think we could manifest bigger things for ourselves rather than staying with someone out of like poverty mentality, out of like, this is so deep and I'll never have that with anyone else because I have my one life and I have my one person, and it really limits us personally. I think I don't try to be mean to people around that, but sometimes our limited scope of we only have one human being that's going to align with us. It's a lot of pressure on the other person, to be honest.
Right.
And societally, that's what we're fed, though, from,
Hallmark
from
movies
day one.
And
not even,
everything.
Rob Lowe's movies, all of his movies.
Rob Lowe. I haven't even heard of Rob Lowe in a long time. I don't think of him as like the heartthrob anymore.
Well, he is. You should watch Holiday in the Wild with Charlotte.
Well, I've seen Holiday in
Sex
the Wild.
in the City. I mean, come on. I'm a hardcore lesbian, but if he was my bush pilot, that'd be some. That's why I'm going to Kenya.
There you go. Because of Rob Lowe.
Rob Lowe is like the hottest thing on earth. I mean, I wish I was Rob Lowe, but like, if he was my bush pilot and I was flying to Kenya, so I'm on my way to find that.
Yes.
But I think that's people are fed this belief that there's like one right way and that there's one right person and there's one right this and that,
Mm-hmm.
But I want to jump in and ask like the alternate question now. So, the idea that there isn't necessarily one right person. Can there be a wrong person? So like, what if, like on an intuitive level, you are like dating someone and this happened to me several relationships ago. I was like, we are biding time. Like I don't feel a soul connection with you. I don't feel like I've had a past life with you. And is it a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point? Or is there something that is like, you know what? I don't have any kind of soul connection with this person. I should just peace out, get out of here, and try to find someone who I do have a soul connection with. I mean, is there some kind of, is there something with that? Or is it just like whoever you meet, maybe you had a past life or maybe you didn't and it doesn't matter? Or is it really something to consider?
I mean, there are a lot of folks that are just learning, are leaning into partnership because they just want to feel good, right? So some folks, it really depends on, again, remember I said how some people have the mission to just experience the energy. Some people have more of that longing sort of mission activation kind of feeling in their space. And again, there's no right or wrong, just depending on the life we choose different ideas of what we want to do. If you're in a relationship with someone, I don't think you have to have a past life or them necessarily be in your soul family for it to be deep. But I think that's where that awareness in your space of like, am I staying in this relationship because it feels good on a basic level? I tend to use the word inspiration a lot because I really want to be inspired in my relationship. And when I mean inspired, it doesn't mean like everything has to be like bells and whistles and things all the time. But I like to witness my partner with that, like, wow, that was really cool what you're doing. I really like how you approach that. Or like, this is really neat. I like to learn all the time. Just super, super. One of my friends calls me her galactic librarian because I'm constantly like taking courses, learning, challenging things. And so I guess like my question always when people are like, I don't know if there's a bigger, deeper spiritual thing here. I don't necessarily feel it. And I'm like, okay, well, are you in it because you feel good or what's the main reasons? Are you inspired? And then I usually ask people, if you imagine your most inspiring relationship, if that person came along, would that challenge this relationship or would you let go of it immediately? And so usually it becomes a question of like, if you get clear on your picture and you imagine that a being that was more in alignment came in, is the person you're with pretty close in alignment? You know, or is there actually something that you're longing for? And this is just sort of out of more of a fear space or out of a, like, I don't want to be alone space or like, I don't think it's going to get any better space. A lot of times people will stay in kind of that homeostasis energy with someone because there's fear, that there won't be a better alignment. And again, this is from like the psychic reading perspective. I had a woman come in who was like, gosh, I think in like her early 80s. And she was like, is it possible? She was like, do I have another lover in here? I want to know.
Wow.
She's like, I really want to know if there's another being. And I looked at her field and I was like, here's the thing. There is. I said, however, that timeline is possible if you're doing your work. And she says, what do you mean by my work? And I was like, there's some things that you've been putting off doing because like you're waiting for another person to come do it with you. I said, so part of your work is activating that frequency in yourself so that your person can find you, because sometimes we put out this idea of wanting that person, but we have to kind of like wait for them to go through certain things or grow through certain things. And so people, they kind of like stay in kind of like this homeostasis of not pushing. And I was like, if you continue to push, you continue to evolve and grow, and you go down this timeline of inspiration. She wanted to travel and do things. I said, I think you're going to find this activated being like in your space. And so that sort of made me see a lot of folks have this fear of like, well, like, what if it doesn't get better? What if someone's not more aligned? And I'm like, well, I haven't had an experience yet where like someone possible is not on someone's timeline in terms of being aligned with them. If that person's really evolving and honoring themselves. I see it a lot, actually. So I don't know if that fully answers your question in a way, but,
yeah.
I don't want to put this idea that if you haven't had a past life with someone, right, that, like it's not a deeper spiritual thing or like you shouldn't spend time with someone. I think it's really trusting your deep, empathic, intuitive knowing around what you're learning with that person and deciding like, do our pictures match, right? Does this deeper
Yeah,
energy?
and maybe this is the first life you're gonna have together in a series of many.
There you go. There you go.
Right?
Boom.
Boom.
Mic drop.
Okay.
Oh goodness. Okay. I feel we have to end on that note. That was such a good one. Well, so as we wrap up, Xandra, this has been so interesting. We're going to have you back on. This was so
Yeah,
cool.
we want to have you back on. I have
Absolutely.
a lot more to talk about.
We have like 1,000 questions. Every question you answer, I have like 12 more questions. Anyways, what's kind of in the future docket for you? Any new projects, initiatives, endeavors, things that our listeners might say, "Ooh, that's interesting." And then further, how can they reach out to you or work with you or learn more about you?
Right now I'm in the winter of rest and trying to actually honor it. But all of my updates, things like that, are just on one website. Thankfully, there's only one now.
Oh,
and it's Soul Essence. Yes, it's soulessencepsychotherapy.com.
Yeah, I actually read some of your stuff. Uh-oh, did we freeze?
Mm-mm.
Nope, you're here. Excellent. soulessencepsychotherapy.com. So the kinds of things I know that, just real quickly kind of for our listeners. So, some of them are going to be in states other than Colorado, because that's where you're based out of, right? You say Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Are they able to work with you kind of in a cross state line kind of thing if they were to reach out virtually?
Usually I do free consultations for folks on the therapy realm if they're in Colorado. And then there's an option on my website if someone's looking for spiritual coaching, and it asks questions like, what are your goals? What are you looking for? And so I do consultations with folks, and I get a sense pretty fast of like, are you in more of the mental health round? If they are, usually I give instructions for like, this is how to find people that are going to be more like me, like in your state. Or if they're a good candidate for spiritual coaching, then we talk about, what does that look like? What do you want to learn? How do you want to evolve? Right? Some people are like, I want to heal. I want to learn about this chakra system, or I want to work with my guides, or, I want to be able to create this energy practice. So it's very attuned depending on the person. But I'm kind of like an octopus. I have so many resources for people. So I always tell folks, just sign up for a consultation for in-state or out. And if I'm not the right person, I'm going to try to get you plugged into the right person, because I see people go through like years of working with the wrong people. And I'm like, can we just get you to the right source? Can we just get you to the right person? So I end up being that person a lot for people.
No, that's great, because part of it is that fit that's really important.
100%.
Yeah. Well, this has been so interesting and so helpful, because, when we talk about thriving in relationships, a lot of time we think about, and we've been talking a lot about this kind of interplay and the dynamic between two people. But I think today, what we were really able to focus on is a lot of the kind of inner work, the spiritual work that people want to do while maybe in partnership, or in Tracy's case, outside of partnership. But the idea of that sort of this kind of solo journey in a way, and how that can contribute to a thriving relationship, and the authenticity of being able to develop your own spiritual kind of awakening, and how you might interact with your partner to support you in that, or be that supportive partner to the person who's going through that themselves. And so I think there's a lot of really great takeaways from this. And so Xandra, thank you so much for being on today. Really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Yes. And for all of our listeners out there, until our next episode, go out there and rock those relationships. If you liked what you heard, check out our show notes for resources from today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram under Rock That Relationship, and go to our website at rockthatrelationship.com for updated episodes and more great information.
Thanks for listening. Now go rock those relationships.